So my paper is entitled, What's the Rap? Thinking Critically About Citation Practices Given the Rise of Hip Hop. I write a lot about hip hop. I published a book on hip hop in 2018 and have talked about hip hop in a number of different contexts, from cultural studies to law. I do a lot of work in cultural studies and rhetoric, which are my backgrounds, at least according to my PhD work, but also got a law degree before that. So I've done a lot of work on hip hop and the law as well. And this is a paper that is fundamentally about how do we account for the way we teach writing and communication, given that the number and types of text available to students have greatly changed in the last 10 or 20 years. And I'm focusing predominantly on hip hop, but the questions I raise and the arguments I'll put forward certainly aren't just a question of hip hop. Obviously, hip hop is not the only form of music consumed, and other genres probably raise some of these questions as well. I just happen to be a hip hop person, so I've got no references to country music. I apologize to my country music listening fans. So I'm just going to read the paper, as is common in communication studies. It's weird that for a group of scholars who study communication, how bad we are at giving papers. But alas, I am subject to the norms of my discipline. So be prepared to be bored for about 11 pages. Hip hop demands rethinking what counts as evidence in our written and spoken communication. There are several reasons why this new way of thinking is beneficial, including not only a deeper appreciation for texts and cultures, but also because the ability to weigh the relative significance of evidence and use that evidence appropriately are life skills that benefit students well beyond their time in school. Students are no longer confined to the dusty tomes and crumpled journal paper of yesteryear. The confluence of hip hop music and digital technology means students have ever increasing opportunities to experience, use, and ultimately cite hip hop in their academic work. This requires scholars and students to improve their thinking about evidence and citation practices. This paper contends that teachers, particularly those with more traditional views of learning, must rethink teaching citation practices and ideas about evidence and argumentation to account for music and music videos, and the ways hip hop music calls into question authenticity and originality means teachers and students must critically analyze, as they ideally would with other text and cultural forms, what a hip hop song purports to argue, and that as a result, hip hop helps expand for the better our understanding of evidence and argumentation. Hip hop is not simply ascendant, but rather has ascended. Browse the latest music charts, television channel guides, or bookstore shelves, and hip hop is present. Walk through the academic quad, attend a student organization fair, or wander into the nearest bar, and one is likely to hear either the newest trap music, a subgenre of hip hop music popular in the US South, or classics from Tupac Shakur and the Notorious B.I.G. In many communities across the United States and internationally as well, it is increasingly difficult to avoid hip hop music, let alone the related classical elements of hip hop, breakdancing, DJing, and graffiti art. My background in Zoom is a store cover painted with the Super Mario Brothers character Mario that was from some trip. I always take pictures of street art and graffiti, I think in Costa Rica. The picture is either from Costa Rica, Barcelona, or Brussels. So if you happen to know where this Mario came from, feel free to tell me so I can more effectively tag it on Instagram. Since its birth in late 1970s New York, hip hop has helped galvanize support for social justice, blossomed into a multi-billion-dollar cultural formation, and affected areas of culture as diverse as law and fashion. Like many artistic forms, hip hop is not without its critics. Any investigation of or advocacy for hip hop must acknowledge its misogyny, homophobia, and violence. Rather than disregard hip hop music because of its faults, studying hip hop can help produce a deeper understanding of culture despite its shortcomings. And of course, those shortcomings are not unique to hip hop. We see this in many other forms of music as well. Scholars are increasingly studying the impact of hip hop has on scholars and scholarship across a number of disciplines. This work emphasizes hip hop as a teaching tool, an object of study, and a way to think about instruction. As such, hip hop's role in teaching and learning is now well studied. However, hip hop is no panacea. It will not reach all students, it will not solve all classroom instructional difficulties, and it will not avail itself to every class assignment. Yet, hip hop may still provide important material for students in their studies, helping them to join scholarly communities and become better writers and speakers. In the same ways that other musical forms, from jazz to folk, have found their way into scholarship, so too can hip hop be an important resource and area of study. However, the study of hip hop raises important issues. Discussions of citation practices and the ways they help and hinder academic writing and argument are prevalent in many disciplines. So numerous are the citations that even wading modestly into these waters produces a significant amount of citations and lack of clarity. Reckdahl has argued that the digital revolution has complicated citation and made it more difficult for writers to assess a source's validity. If scholars struggle with these ideas, one might imagine students are also struggling. Hip hop, which is increasingly digital, and students, who are often more digitally literate, combine into a perfect storm. Okay, Richard says I should share my paper. Let's try that.
Yeah, I just thought maybe it'd help with like multiple modalities.
True.
Along as you're reading it is like educationally more effective.
Let's see if that works. We'll full screen it. And theoretically, you should be, theoretically, you should be able to see me. Okay.
I see it. That's good.
Okay, awesome.
And you. I can see you too.
And me. Oh my gosh. That's way too much Nick Sciullo. My classrooms would be appalled. But so if scholars agree, or if scholars struggle with these ideas, one might imagine students are also struggling. Hip hop, which is increasingly digital, and students who are often more digitally literate, of course, not always. One of the things that I run into is a lot of teachers still hold on to this digital nativity idea, this digital native idea. And we know that a lot of students who are in school don't have the digital backgrounds that we might think they do. Just because you can use TikTok and Instagram doesn't mean you can use Blackboard or effectively analyze the validity of sources you find on the internet. And this combines into the perfect storm that educators must address if they follow Reckdahl's general claim that the digital era complicates argument and effective citation skills. Furthermore, handbooks are not the answer, as they are often poor citation guides, and teachers are pivotal in helping students appreciate why citation skills are important, as well as what those citation skills indicate about writers. If handbooks are poor guides, then students might not be expected to cite sources well. Browse the selections of handbooks at the university bookstore, and one is left with little advice on choosing the best evidence if citation practices are covered thoroughly. Rose argued that citation credibility builds community, creating disciplinary identity, and can be understood as a way to help bring students together. This then positions study of hip hop as a community building activity that may afford students not only the time to work on citations, but also the opportunity to better know each other and their discipline. New challenges to what counts as evidence or how one cites a source demand continued investigation by students and teachers alike. And we'll also edit these things on the fly. The relationship between students and teachers is particularly important in the context of citation styles. Educators can help frame, if not enable, students' expression of self, helping students to discuss what matters to them and what text and ideas are important. Expanding discussions of evidence and citation to include hip hop can only help make students better writers and speakers, even if they choose not to work with hip hop or have interests that are neither written nor musical. Hip hop is an access point into, quote, a more productive, respectful, and legitimate relationship to students and their writing. Hip hop requires a rethinking of citation practices to account for lyrics, digital dissemination, and music videos. Yet college students are notoriously weak at citation skills. This may be the result of a number of issues: high school teachers who focus more on content than citation, college colleagues who do the same, lack of student effort, difficulties understanding teacher expectations, confusion over citation norms, and more. The rise of computer-generated citations produces difficulties as well, as students find recourse and shortcuts instead of learning citation styles, occasionally to the disastrous result of incomprehensible strings of word and punctuation meant to be a citation. I see these a lot when people use these online citation generators, and I get citations that I can't even describe what I'm looking at. And despite my best efforts, I always try to tell them not to use them, and nobody seems to care. With changes in technology, teachers are tasked with informing students of new citation practices relative to those advances. They must also keep up to date on changes in citation practices as well as individual journal practices, which occasionally modify established citation criteria. Long gone are the days of citing books and journal articles in their paper form. Increasingly, journal articles are accessed only via the internet. I actually can't remember the last time I read a paper journal. Although I get mailed them, unfortunately, all the time. I read almost everything on the internet. Web pages are becoming popular sources of information, many scholarly, of course, in nature, and quite a few peer-reviewed. This also means that music videos, playlists, lyrics, and album art may find themselves into student assignments. The world of multimedia requires scholars to devote time to multimedia instruction in the English classroom, and no doubt beyond. That hip-hop is disseminated through multimedia means students using or studying hip-hop will be confronted with changes and sometimes complex norms about how to cite musical and electronic material. Scholars must then teach citation skills that account for these texts and the world of multimedia affecting students at increasing rates. Despite students' limited citation skills, students tend to understand that books and scholarly journal articles are citable resources. Teachers, of course, recognize this. It is fairly easy to understand the formats for citing books and journal articles with a little bit of effort. But students may not understand that music and music videos are in fact citable resources as well. This is complicated by teachers who might be skeptical of music and music videos as evidence. The author has heard everything from music is not a text, which is preposterous to a rhetorician who studies public culture like me, to English class should only be about the canon. Obviously, we've all kind of heard this recourse to the canon argument. Most scholars likely have come across these arguments in their departments and schools, and may have even made similar arguments themselves, even though they seem out of touch with the modern world. Every major United States citation style guide, MLA, APA, Chicago, provides for music and music video citation. First-year students armed with their hacker style manual may not, though, receive the complex citation instruction to comfortably cite digital and oral texts. Furthermore, college students might have only written papers where teachers mandated citations that were confined to books, journals, and newspaper articles that could be found in the high school library, for example. Therefore, teachers must help students work through citing these new resources. Working with this deficit of experience, students also often want to write and speak about issues that matter to them, making desire for meaningful discussion and lack of experience in citation coverage on hip-hop's role in scholarship. Teachers should not do away with the substance and style classics of English instructions, but they ought to embrace the world of multimedia around them, appreciating that doing so can help students learn. Many of today's students would not be inclined to compose works on Chaucer or World War II or Thomas Jefferson or the tenets of classical republicanism. While these topics are fine avenues of study, there are also many new ideas, people, and texts worthy of exploring. One might reasonably argue that forcing students away from popular culture texts could inhibit their learning by discouraging them from engaging their lived experience. So, students interested in hip-hop often choose to write and speak about social justice, current events, and new texts. This is to argue hip-hop helps expand curricula in including new text and issues. For their part, teachers are busy, and understanding the minute differences in citation style guide updates is difficult. Furthermore, citation style guide editors often debate how to cite new and old formats in online discussions, which can make keeping up to date difficult. One also should be careful to fault teachers who teach what they know, citing books and academic articles, and perhaps not blogs, music videos, and poetry slams. Yet, as students become more savvy media consumers and old models of knowledge dissemination become less helpful, all teachers must begin to engage new text and resources. This means helping students do the same. Therefore, teachers must be critical of their citation skills knowledge as well as their own citation practices. This means knowing about and teaching the ways to cite songs and music videos. This is not meant to do away with traditional evidence, but to augment it. The English classroom can be expanded to encompass more opportunities to learn, research, and write by giving hip hop its due. Some may scoff at this argument, assuming all teachers of English or any other subject are not only actively teaching how to cite all sources, but as well that they readily accept music and music videos as evidence appropriate for academic writing. I'm not sure either of those is true. The picture, however, is likely more complicated. Some teachers were schooled in an era where hip hop was not yet a part of the music scene. Others may have little or no exposure to hip hop, and yet others may hold traditional notions of what constitutes a reliable source. As a result, educators may have trouble dealing with hip hop's oppositional tendencies. This problem is not unique to hip hop, as other musical forms may present similar issues. For every scholar interested in phenomenological inquiry, and I am, or autoethnography, I am not, there is a scholar who never leaves the archive. For every digital humanities scholar, there's a Stanford Literature Lab trained quantitative scholar. These differences in training, department structure, job description, and personal interest mean scholars approach text, evidence, and argument in different ways. Recognizing one's own text and citation preferences can only help educators do a better job teaching students. Along with questions of how teachers think about evidence and how students cite that evidence, the questions of music's truthfulness remains important. To be sure, music, like other writing and speaking, can both abide some notion of truth as well as readily avail itself to the flourishes of fiction. And if educators are to teach students about citations, then they ought to teach students about weighing the validity and importance of material to be cited. If a hip hop song is offered as evidence of a proposition, one may be called upon to assess whether the citation actually supports the claim for which it is proffered. Citations to material that is untrue, unreliable, unimportant can call an author's ethos into question and in turn lead readers to question the veracity of an argument. Recognizing that hip hop music may not in fact be true in the colloquial sense does not diminish, though, its persuasive import, even while it may call into question what hip hop as evidence means or how it helps an argument. Aesop's fables are not persuasive because they are true. Hip hop then requires educators to help students think through questions of evidence and proof while using new sources in their writing and speaking. Assessing sources' veracity is not always intuitive. While scholars may be adept at weighing the truthfulness of a source, students face more difficulty. Understanding the veracity of a source is an art honed over time and with practice. Scholars and students should ask, what is this artist's ethos? Are the artist's claims supported? What do we know from other sources about the artist's claim? Does this song ring true given other claims by this or other artist and other songs? As with every source, comparison and weighing are key. A hip hop song or artist deserves the same scrutiny, even if one might recognize that part of hip hop's persuasive power lies not in the truth, but in its style. So being able to divorce music's truth from its persuasive capacities, that is to indicate understanding hip hop as rhetorical, can help educators and students incorporate hip hop into their work in meaningful ways. And I'm almost finished. One might counter that even if hip hop is persuasive or a valid source of evidence, that it might not belong in the classroom because hip hop often has violent and misogynistic themes. Simply because hip hop does some good for the writer or speaker in the classroom, opponents may argue that music or culture has no place in school. These arguments still get made resoundingly, loudly in some contexts. The causal relationship between violent hip hop lyrics and violent crime has had its supporters over the years, from C. Dolores Tucker to Bill O'Reilly. For these individuals, correlation appears to apply causation, even though the correlation between hip hop and violence is in fact negative. To be sure, hip hop artists also embellish, lie, exaggerate, engage in hyperbole, and carefully practice wordplay. This means students must consider a song's lyrics, context, and even an artist's biographical details in assessing what a song might support or prove. These skills are important regardless of students' discipline or their plans after school. Rather than dismiss hip hop as too violent or reduce it to its worst lyrics or least exemplary artists, scholars should consider the ways hip hop students understand the grammar of life. We have hip hop to thank for expanding our understanding, I think, of evidence and argument, as well as encourage students to learn more about citation practices. These skills are necessary for the rest of one's life. Hip hop presents new challenges given its relationship to digital media, and as a result presents ample opportunities for teaching and learning from scholars and students alike. Hip hop is culturally relevant because it spreads across the multimedia world, and today's students have more exposure to it than ever before. Because students are likely to be influenced by and interested in hip hop, educators would be well served to teach citation skills and evidence comparison with respect to the salient cultural form. If scholars and students do this, they stand to benefit from a richer understanding of culture and an expanded appreciation for the complexity of knowledge circulation. These are laudable goals for students and teachers and will produce both with opportunities to engage hip hop as an object and method of study. And that's the end of my paper. Thank you, everyone.